Using the morning to relax and enjoy his newly furnished kitchen, Jules feels nearly comfortable and content, despite the many lingering issues stubbornly clinging to the back of his mind. Deciding to return the semi-truck back to the factories to swap out with his regular vehicle, he looks forward to the relative calm he had established there that would allow him a final look inside the many crates he had yet to check. Feeling almost a sense of ownership over this industrial district now, he clears the pitiful amount of undead without a second thought before going about his business. Pulling into the smaller warehouse, he begins to break down and search the containers he hadn't reached yet, only to discover his body quickly growing weak at the prolonged effort. Unable to lift his hammer as the afternoon turns to evening, he starts to more pointedly question his physical state, before opting to check the few vehicles he had passed over in the nearby parking lot. Stumbling upon a key in the near-pristine van it went to, Jules doesn't think twice about claiming the new ride, as both the improvements in reliability and cargo space couldn't be abandoned. Finding the time to analyze himself on the ride home, Jules begins to identify the source of his newfound fragility. Staring at his face in the rearview mirror revealed thinner features, gaunt cheeks, and exhausted eyes that served as the boldest of answers. While he had rationed his food enough to keep from starving to the point of outright death, he hadn't been ingesting enough calories to keep up with the demanding trials he forced his body through each and every day, leaving him frail and concerned. Waking up with a fresh determination to find a sizable source of calories, he forces himself to face a fear that had been haunting him for far too long: returning to the country club. Jules knew there was both food and supplies there he desperately needed. The only question was if the undead had released their stranglehold on the once secure shelter. Hoping he was coming into contact with the remnants of the scattered horde, he slowly clears the road before feeling the same exhaustion creeping in from yesterday. Opting to scout ahead to see if reaching the campus was even realistic, he quickly discovers his worst nightmare as the road leading to the entrance is already congested with the mindless undead. Too afraid of finding himself trapped between the affluent fencing and the overgrown trees, he quickly steers his direction towards the resort town just west of his station, hoping that some sliver of luck would provide him with what he needed. Hearing a burglar alarm blaring through the chill air, Jules confirms his already dreaded assumption by spotting a rapidly amassing horde growing directly in his path. Perhaps if he had days or weeks to dedicate to clearing this town, he could scrape a reasonable amount of food from its carcass, but his needs were far more immediate and required a different solution. Next, planning on venturing past the community he had cleared, he's unsurprised to discover his efforts had been washed away by the endless waves of infected that now clog the eastern side of the neighborhood with their stench. Stubbornly evicting the unwelcome guests, he eventually finds his way back upon the main road, only to find more hurdles to overcome. Finally discovering a gravel road that wasn't entirely overrun, Jules steadily begins to work his way through the forgotten farmland as the afternoon sets in and his arms tremble with gentle protest. Apathetically recognizing a group of freshly turned corpses as he clears an isolated garage, Jules barely has the energy to summon any sort of emotion as his mind stays entirely focused on the task at hand. Luckily able to sneak towards the closest farmhouse, Jules already finds himself salivating at the thought of what treats await him before his dreams are shattered by an entirely cleaned out kitchen. Knowing now that the food he had so desperately desired was more than likely leaking out of the undead survivors he had just snuffed out, Jules can't help but feel cheated and furious while defeatedly returning to his van. Though I knew the answer, I had to see for myself what the world looks like outside the relative safety I've carved out the country club, infested. The resort town to the west, infested. Even the rural farmhouses on the way to Riverside, infested. Today I stumbled across what undoubtedly was a group of survivors who had suffered the same fate as my group, shambling around in gear that showed they were prepping for the winter, but this hellish world wasn't going to let them get that far. Pulling from my experiences so far, and learning from the world around me, I've become rather confident in the hypothesis that has been building in my mind. There is no safety in numbers. Others simply slow you down or get in the way. Marcus learned that lesson the easy way when defending me, and I learned it the hard way by cowering behind him. The world is now only meant for the isolated and the dead. Jules. Feeling his body begrudgingly rising with the foggy morning, Jules looks over the couple days of food he has left before a final source of determination ignites in the depths of his stubborn heart. There were a limited amount of options left, none of them ideal, but perhaps the most likely to keep him alive was the desperate attempt to fish despite the increasingly colder days of winter. Knowing you have to find some place to hold up nearby the river, Jules keeps his eyes to the north and begins to navigate through the sea of death that stood in his way. Making it to the final turnoff before the quarantine zone, he remembers the existence of a general store along the gravel road leading to the river, but making it there would require another lengthy massacre. clearing the highway leading up to the gas station after several hours, and pushing himself until he could barely stand, Jules collects himself beside his van and enjoys the warmth of the sun-soaked pavement before forcing himself to rise and fight once again. Making it inside as evening falls around him, Jules is rewarded once again with a slap in the face, as the station holds only crumbs compared to the energy he had spent to make it here. Aware that he would be dooming himself if he made the long trip home without anything notable to show for it, he ignores the painful aching of his wobbly legs and hoists his crowbar up for another round of death. As he works on creating a safe path to the hopefully stocked store, Jules' struggling mind picks up on the concerning pattern he had witnessed far too many times before. In the failing light of the day, corpse after shambling corpse stumble from the nearby woods and drag their compromised figures towards the spilled blood of their brethren. At first, Jules believes he can persist, weather the storm of the encroaching undead, but eventually the sum of the situation strikes through his fragile resolve and causes him to flee in defeat. Returning to a scene that Jules had hoped he would never see again, he can't help but feel totally and completely beaten down as he's forced through the break in his fence once again and trudges through the dark woods back to his sanctuary. Waking up to the first day of November, Jules doesn't give up on his hope of securing a place along the river as he checks his map and stares down the country road he had cleaved through over a month ago. Trying to prepare himself for the challenging day during his walk, a sign of hope comes in the form of a resilient blueberry bush that Jules ravenously descends upon with a weak smile. Winding his way through the back roads, he eventually makes it to the river and attempts to approach the general store from the other side, but finds it thoroughly infested beyond his capabilities. Desperately turning down a smaller road that still ran parallel with the river, Jules once again is provided a whiff of hope as he spots two homes tucked away from the larger hordes. Checking the first house, he's able to find a small amount of food, but not much else. While this shelter could serve his purposes, he still holds onto his fragile optimism as he makes his way over to the second potential home. Surprised to discover that the second pleasant structure appeared to be completely untouched by the undead, Jules grows confident that this peaceful oasis could be his temporary salvation with just a little more effort. Though he was hopeful in his plan, he still had to make the lengthy and trying trip back to his station, so that he could load up the fishing supplies and tools he would need to keep this new location secure. Then of course, he'd have to make it back once more. Making it back to Little Hope with a fresh scattering of dents and scratches on his once pristine van, Jules finally lets his guard down for one final evening in preparation for the monumental project waiting for him in the following morning. Gritting his teeth as he makes himself assess the state of his body for the first time in weeks, Jules strips off the filthy layers that become a second skin and scrubs the stubborn grime clinging to his taut flesh. Despite all my efforts, my body is beginning to fail me. Simply glancing at my reflection in the mirror reveals just how much weight I have lost since the outbreak. Before, I might have been considered a little on the heavy side, but now I can see my ribs pressing out against my thin layer of flesh. The deadly cycle of killing for scraps of food is slowly but surely ruining me. That's why my recent discovery appears to be the only option. There is a house by the river just north of Little Hope, surprisingly clear of the undead, and perhaps a place I can fish for much-needed calories. Though even the single book I have read warns me of the poor yields during these cold months. But fuck it. Jules.